Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the South Coast Air Quality Management District's Rule 2305 pertaining to the WAIRE program. The WAIRE program, or Warehouse Actions and Investments to Reduce Emissions program, is an indirect source rule pertaining to warehouses. So what is an indirect source rule? The SCAQMD, or AQMD for short, is charged with regulating stationary sources and reducing the environmental impact of these sources. However, in this region, the overwhelming source of emissions affecting ozone and fine particulate matter are actually mobile sources. And of these mobile sources, diesel is a significant source of pollution. So recognizing this, the AQMD is now focusing on warehouses that have typically not been heavily regulated, essentially incentivizing them to apply pressure on their trucking services to use cleaner modes of transportation. So, who does WAIRE apply to? The rule applies to owners and operators of warehouses in the SCAQMD jurisdiction with greater than or equal to 100,000 square feet of indoor floor space in a single building. Now, warehouse operators may be exempt from parts of the rule if they control less than 50,000 square feet of the warehouse space within that building. The thing to keep in mind is that the WAIRE program was not actually intended to regulate manufacturing facilities. So if a facility has on-site manufacturing processes in the same building as its warehousing space, then any raw materials stored in the building can actually be excluded from the determination of the warehousing activity square footage. This means that designated office space or space taken up by permanent manufacturing equipment and space that is used to store raw materials, for example, roll stock, can actually be excluded in determining if the facility meets their criteria for having to earn WAIRE points. AQMD is very cognizant about any facilities that may be trying to essentially get out of the requirement for earning WAIRE points. So for example, no finished goods can be stored in the space excluded from the WPCO applicability for storing raw materials. The second point is that the area excluded should be clearly defined and marked so that the storage of finished products does not encroach on this space. Third, the manufacturer operations must exist in the same building that is storing the raw materials. If no manufacturing exists in that building, then that space would be considered warehousing, even if it's only storing raw materials and not finished products. And lastly, the building must be one contiguous space, that is under one roof. So if someone must walk outside to access the next building, then that separate building must also include manufacturing operations as well to take advantage of this exemption. What are the requirements of the WAIRE program? The WAIRE program has record keeping and reporting requirements, which is pretty common in AQMD regulations. In addition to this, the WAIRE program requires that operators earn or obtain points to meet their WAIRE Points Compliance Obligation, or WPCO. The WPCO is calculated by the weighted annual truck trips, or watts for short, multiplied by a stringency factor and an annual variable which reflects the phase-in schedule of the program. Essentially, warehouses are going to be required to earn and obtain more WAIRE points for the same amount of truck trips as the years progress. The weighting of the annual truck trips is based on the types of trucks and the number of trips each of those types makes to the warehouse each year. The stringency is 0.0025 points per watt, or weighted average truck trip, phased in over 3 years. It's essentially the number of points each warehouse must obtain every year based on the number and type of truck trips that are taken. Lastly, the annual variable is based on the size of the warehouse to essentially allow for a more gradual phase-in for smaller warehouses. Please note that by 2026, all warehouses will have a variable of 1. How can you earn WAIRE points? The AQMD has a list of options that they call the WAIRE menu, which includes acquiring zero emissions or net zero emission trucks, installing zero emission charging stations, or even installing on-site systems such as solar panels. Now, instead of earning WAIRE points, warehouses can actually choose to obtain them. A warehouse operator can develop and implement a site-specific custom WAIRE plan of actions that aren't already included on AQMD's menu. Of course, the agency would have to approve that. Secondly, a warehouse operator can pay a mitigation fee of $1,000 per WAIRE point. So if a warehouse needs to meet an obligation of 60 WAIRE points each year, they would need to pay $60,000 each year. Or lastly, a warehouse could transfer bank points, either points that are earned at other locations under the same operator, or from the warehouse owner to the operator, or excess WAIRE points that the warehouse may have previously earned in years prior and banked for future use. Lastly, a warehouse can essentially mix and match any of these options to meet their WAIRE points compliance obligation. What are the reporting requirements of the WAIRE program? There are 3 types of reports. The WAN, which is the Warehouse Operations Notification, the ISIR, or Initial Site Information Report, and the AWR, or the Annual WAIRE Report. The WAN, or Warehouse Operations Notification, was required to be submitted by the warehouse owner by September 1st, 2021. It's the only reporting obligation for warehouse owners under Rule 2305. That being said, owners are still obligated to report if there are changes. So for example, if the operator of the warehouse changes, the WAN must be submitted within 14 days. Or if there's any type of renovation that changes the square footage, then this must be reported to the AQMD within 30 days. The other 2 reports, the ISIR and the AWR, must be submitted by warehouse operators, and the timing of the submission of these reports is based on warehouse size. There are essentially 3 phases. Phase 1 includes all warehouses that are greater than or equal to 250,000 square feet. Their initial site information report for these facilities was required on July 1st, 2022. Phase 2 includes all warehouses that are greater than or equal to 150,000 square feet up to 250,000 square feet, and their initial site information report was required on July 1st, 2023. And lastly, Phase 3 is all warehouses that are greater than or equal to 100,000 square feet up to 150,000 square feet. The ISIR for these facilities is required by July 1st, 2024. Now, similarly, the timing of the AWR is also based on these 3 phases. Phase 1 was required to submit their first annual report by January 31st, 2023. Phase 2 was required to submit their first annual report by January 31st, 2024. And lastly, Phase 3 will be required to submit their first annual report by January 31st, 2025. Now let's go into a little more detail about each one of these reports. The Warehouse Operations Notification, or WAN, is the only reporting obligation for warehouse owners under Rule 2305. Owners are required to submit basic information: warehouse size or location, the leasee's name or names and contact information, the lease start and end dates, the previous operator's information, and the square footage of the building used for warehousing activities. This report was due on September 1st, 2021, but if there are any changes, then these must be reported as well. For example, if the operator of the warehouse changes, the WAN must be submitted within 14 days. And if there's been any kind of renovation that changes the square footage, then this also must be reported to the HMD, but within 30 days. Only warehouse operators must earn WAIRE points, but owners can opt in if they choose, and they can transfer these points to the operator. The Initial Site Information Report, or ISIR, must be submitted by warehouse operators, and it's due before the AWR. It's a one-time report for the first year an operator is in a building. The ISIR requires operators to report the warehouse size and area, the number of truck trips in the past 12-month period, and the number of truck trips that are anticipated. They also must include a plan to meet the WPCO, or the WAIRE point compliance obligation, as well as details on potential on-site equipment. The annual WAIRE report, or AWR, must be submitted no later than January 31st after the previous compliance year. The AWR requires operators to report the number of truck trips for the previous compliance period, so January through December of the previous year, the number of WAIRE points that were earned by the operator through the menu of potential actions, and the metrics used to calculate how many WAIRE points were actually earned. All of these reports are required to be submitted through the WAIRE Program online portal, or WAIRE POP. There are a few exceptions to the requirement for earning WAIRE points for smaller warehouse operators. If an operator cannot use more than 50,000 of that square footage for warehousing activities, they're considered exempt. For any operator that has a WPCO, a points obligation of less than 10, they are also exempt. WPCO is calculated based on the number and type of truck trips, so this essentially exempts facilities that don't have heavy traffic. And lastly, there's a potential exemption for exceptional cases where there is a rare malfunction due to manufacturer or installation defect. But remember, all of these operators may still have reporting requirements even if they aren't required to earn points. So how does a facility calculate the WAIRE Compliance Point Obligation, or WPCO? The SCAQMD has created a tool called the WAIRE User Calculator. This tool includes the menu of items that can be used to earn WAIRE points. Within this spreadsheet, there are 3 tabs. The first tab, called Read Me, includes an overview of the calculator with some brief instruction. The next tab is the calculator. In the upper left-hand corner, operators will input data to calculate the WPCO. The WPCO is calculated by multiplying the weighted annual truck trips, or watts, by a stringency factor and then an annual variable, which reflects the phase-in schedule for the program. In the input area, you can see that the current stringency is set at 0.0025 points per watt. The full stringency will not be in effect until the 3rd year of compliance. Now you can see on the far right hand side of the page, AQMD has included the phase-in schedule stringencies based on warehouse size and year. Next, the operator would enter in the warehouse size in square feet, and then finally the number of truck trips by the type of truck. There are 2 categories, Class 8 trucks and Class 2B through 7 trucks. The operator can enter these visits in either by daily visits or annual visits using the drop-down list, depending on how the facility tracks the number of truck trips. Now keep in mind, 2 truck trips or a round trip equals 1 trip visit. From all these inputs, the WPCO will be generated in the bottom left-hand corner. The WPCO is the number of points the warehouse operator will either need to earn or obtain based on the number of truck trips in the 12-month period. On the right-hand side of this calculator tab is the warehouse menu of actions that can be taken to earn points to meet this obligation. In column H, the warehouse operator will enter in the level of activity for each type of applicable action. The spreadsheet will then calculate the number of points earned by this activity to offset the WPCO. The amount of points earned is based on the level of implementation of the actions taken. Going back to the box in the lower left-hand corner, cells B and C22, the cell under the WPCO will turn green with a check mark when enough points have been earned to offset the obligation in the row above it. Alternatively, the cells will turn orange and read not in compliance if enough WAIRE points aren't earned. If more points are needed, the number of points will appear in the cell below. This defaults to 0 if the obligation has already been met. If there's an excess of points, this will show up in the final row as the number of points banked. But please keep in mind that these points can only be banked for the next 3 compliance years. Thank you for taking the time to review our guidance on SCAQMD's WAIRE program. If you should have any questions or would like further guidance, please don't hesitate to leave us a comment below or contact us at MugenKioku.com. Additionally, you can subscribe to the channel for additional guidance on complying with SCAQMD regulations.